Extra credit.
Well, it's an interesting evening. We have a pre-holiday slowdown and get out of town. We have the police lining the streets. We have imminent storm and snow dump. We have
Lots of obstacles.
a little bit of car. I was even thinking, well, maybe I should cancel class tonight. Let's do it. So here we are. Why not? We'll see what comes, right?
You have a lady and a cat watching online that just texted me.
I hope the cat gets something out of this.
I think so. Sashi Bhagi Jishi and Metok Tran Rira Blingshi and Yindig and Padi Sange Shindu Mite Guargi Drogu Namda Shinla Chuparsho Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Ninyatayami Sanghe Jidang Zogi Jognamla Janju Vardu Dakni Gavzuchi Daki Jinyangi Petzonangi Rola Benjir Sanghe Druparsho Sanghe Judang Zogi Jabnamla Janchu Vardu Dakni Gapsuchi Daki Jinyangi Pezonanki Drola Benjir Sanghe Druparsho Sanghe Jidang Zoki Chognamla Janchu Bardu Dakni Gapsuchi Daki Junyangi Bezonamki Drola Benjir Sanghe Druparsho.
Let's take a few minutes to meditate, please. Check your spine and posture to ensure that you're sitting nicely. You're aware of your breath and count 21 cycles of your breath, beginning with an exhalation. Let go of any of the thoughts. Simply focus on the flow of the air in the nostrils. think now about love and kindness and try to think about or feel the most powerful, intense love and kindness you've ever felt in your life. You can recall it from your past. Try to feel it or see it clearly. What was the highest, strongest, best love that you ever felt? See if you can feel it or remember it. Recall the greatest kindness you've ever felt. The most gratitude. Now imagine the highest wisdom, the greatest wisdom, the most profound wisdom you can. And think of these things as being an embodied being, a holy being, manifesting these qualities. These are qualities, attributes, which are manifest in form. And try to feel that being close to you. You can see them in a perfect form, whatever your perfect form is. You can visualize them in the most perfect, beautiful, exquisite form you can imagine, internally and externally. Feel them close to you. Check in and feel if you'd like them to stay close to you forever. Would you like to have that? And if so, simply ask them from your heart to stay close. If you value those things, it would be good to commit in your heart to embodying them yourself and making that commitment to them. Will you embody those qualities of highest love and kindness and wisdom? Perhaps you can ask them to help you. It's a relationship. You should be clear in your mind if you want to be in this relationship with them. They are there and they do exist. So be clear in your heart and in your mind what you want from them and what you will do. It's not a game. They hear and know what you think and promise, want and don't want. They're omniscient. So be honest. it's a very special relationship, so cherish it and remember it. Call it to mind whenever you want. Oh, thank you for coming. Homage to all whose beings everywhere. So tonight we're on to karma. This week and next week we're going to delve into and discuss everything we can about karma.
Every week, it's all about karma and emptiness.
Every week. No, you missed last week. We did. It's only when you're here, Chris. We just we need to go there, you know? No. So it's an interesting class tonight because Mr. Karma didn't want me to prepare and do class the way I normally do. So we'll see. So for the Karma course, we're working with the Abhidharmakosha. It's our root text. The Abhidharmakosha is a collection of Abhidharma texts. It's a treasure house. It's called the Treasure House of Knowledge. The Abhidharmakosha was written by Master Vasubandhu around 1700 years ago, around 350 AD. And the Abhidharma as a category, as subject matter, comprises many, many texts. And so the kosha is a collection of those things. And you can't really understand it, you can't really follow it, it's in kosha. It's written in a way which says, you know, the four precede the two, which point to the seven. That's all it says. So you're not going to really get a lot out of the root text. And it was meant as a text where people would memorize it. It's, you know, it's essentially crib notes or a highly compressed, highly condensed summary, which can be unpacked and elaborated upon by a teacher. So a teacher would say, you know, go and memorize the Abhidharma. And then the student would come back with, okay, the four point to the three, which lead to the seven. And say, okay, the four are this, and the two are those, and the seven are these, and you go through the practice like this, and then, you know, spend however long explaining it and unpacking it, right? So we can't really work with the Abhidharma directly. We have to go with commentary. And so the commentary that we're using is by His Holiness the First Dalai Lama, Gyalwa Gendum Drup. Gyalwa means ocean of wisdom. It's a title used to apply to Dalai Lamas. And he lived in the late 1300s, 1391 to 1474. And the name of the commentary is Illumination on the Path to Freedom. And when we talk about Abhidharma and Abhidharmakosha, the title itself really contains the meaning and the purpose of the material and the study of the material. In Tibetan it's Chunupa, which means knowledge. In Sanskrit, Abhi means up to or approaching, which is the Nupa in Tibetan. And Dharma, or Chu, which can mean an existing object. But in this case it means a high object, or the highest object. The highest of all existing objects is what? The highest thing is what?
Emptiness?
Nirvana, enlightenment. Emptiness is a sort of a benchmark or a step along the way, you know, as a part of it. You know, you would say that, you know, enlightenment contains the omniscient view of conventional reality, the omniscient view of ultimate reality, along with the ability to emanate. So it sort of is most everything. The most physicality, the most you can do with your body and mind, really, is what you could say. So, and there's certain schools Nirvana, right? Nirvana and enlightenment. So depending upon which school you're in. When we're doing Abhidharma and Abhidharmakosha, we're in the detailist school. We're in the lowest of the four schools of ancient India. This is so this is where Abhidharma comes from. We have our or detailist hats on. So they don't actually talk about, they talk about self-existence and lack of self-existence rather than emptiness. Things lack self-existence. So the idea with Abhidharma is that the root of Abhidharma, right, is that the Abhi and the Dharma, it brings you to the highest thing. It brings you up to approach the highest thing, and so that's the meaning of the name. It's what brings you to the highest thing or leads you to the highest thing. Right? So, so Abhidharma means knowledge, and so it refers to knowledge, a certain type of knowledge, and the knowledge which brings you up to the highest thing. Right? So in the Abhidharma, they talk about. Basically, the Abhidharma talks about. It's like a catalog or an encyclopedia almost of all existence, as you go through the chapters. And so, the third. We're doing the fourth chapter for karma. The fourth chapter of the Abhidharma presents karma, and then when you get into middle way and Madhyamika and the consequence school of mind only, they talk about how karma works and explain how karma works. And then when you get into Lam Rim, it talks about karma consequences. If you do this, you get that. Here are correlations between cause and effect and karmically. So in the Abhidharma presentation, it's saying, all right, here are all the realms of existence. Here is an itemization and a cataloging of everything that we know to exist, and so it goes into this is how the world is formed, this is how long the world lasts, this is how long an eon is, this is different kinds of eons, right? This is how worlds come into existence, this is how worlds go out of existence, and then they talk about in the third chapter. They talk about how this realm and how this world is destroyed, at the end of the certain eon where the sun's supernova as the planet burns to a crisp, the water dries up and the planet burns to a crisp. So, they were talking back then, even, 1,700 years ago or more, they were talking about the smallest particles that exist. And this Polish monk was teaching the other weekend at the school. And he said, they're already talking about the sheep particle and the goat particle, and they were going down. They were talking about subatomic particles and giving them silly names in the Abhidharma. And you could correlate the measurement. It's very interesting. If you do the math, you can correlate the measurements down to our scientific naming and measuring of atoms and subatomic particles and whatnot. So that's the idea with the Abhidharma. It's like, okay, here's what exists down at the subatomic level. Here's what exists in the world. Here's how realms come into being and go out of being. Bravo. And and so after they start going through all these things in terms of talking about this is what's going to happen to you, right? You're going to, the sun's going to supernova, the realm will be destroyed, etc., etc., etc. Then they go in the fourth chapter. Then they go into karma, right? And so the Abhidharma starts to talk about in the fourth chapter. It starts to talk about where do things come from and how and the opening line of the fourth chapter of the Abhidharma is very famous, often quoted. Anybody?
Every world.
In Tibetan, come on. Lele Jikta Natsuki. Alright, that's all I'm going to do. Because I don't speak Tibetan. But the English is.
About to teach the world the same.
All worlds come from karma.
What is karma? Karma is the movement of the mind and what it motivates and what follows. Right? So the opening line of the Abhidharma, the fourth chapter of the Abhidharma, they start talking about karma. Right? So in general, the Abhidharma takes all of existence, everything there is, and defines it into two categories, two classes of stuff, stained and unstained. Okay? So the Abhidharma is saying, look, this is all the polluted stuff, and this is all the pure stuff. This is all the garbage, and this is all the good stuff. Okay, and so it classifies everything according to whether it's stained or unstained, right? And then the fourth chapter is going into where does everything come from, right? So the Abhidharma is this massive cataloging of all of existence, from the subatomic to the cosmic and multi-eons and birth and destructions of planets and realms and the rest, right? And then it's like, look, this is pure, this is impure, and let's talk about that. Right? So, two types of knowledge in the Abhidharma: stained and unstained. Right? So, what do you think is unstained? What do you think might be in the unstained category? Classification. Sorry?
Buddhas, angels.
Buddhism. I thought you were going to say like cheese curls or something. No. Like Chris said cheese curls. I didn't hear what you said. You said like Dr. Pepper, right? Or something like that, right? Yeah. Thought we're on a roll there. Yeah. So that's not quite what they say, but they say there are, we talk about there are 5 paths, right? In Buddhism, there are path of
Accumulation.
Accumulate. See.
What's the first? What's the first? If you're
Preparation.
Preparation.
Right.
Preparation of what? Preparation what? About what?
Preparing to see emptiness.
Preparing to go on a road trip. No. Preparing
To ignorance.
preparing
To see emptiness.
preparing to see emptiness. What's the other?
Renunciation.
Yeah. Renunciation. Is it? Oh, that's renunciation, bodhicitta, and correct view. That's the other list.
Okay.
That's the 3, not the 5. See, that's why if we talk about the 3, the 5, the 7, it's not very helpful, right?
Another one of these lists.
There's so many lists. Yeah.
Accumulation.
Okay, preparation and accumulation. Yeah, you start to prepare to see higher things, ultimate reality. You start to accumulate the causes, right? To see higher things and ultimate reality, right? And you see ultimate reality. And then you have to use what you saw at that level of reality to become completely pure, right? And you become completely pure, then you are enlightened, right? So what they're calling the unstained actually relates to paths 3, 4, and 5, right? Which is the perception of ultimate pure reality, and the work you do based upon that correct view and that direct, deep experience, and the result of becoming enlightened, right? So from the Abhidharma perspective, paths 3, 4, and 5 are unstained. These sort of the unstained side of things. The knowledge associated with those 3 paths are unstained, right? Are unstained knowledge, right? So, and those constitute wisdom and its accessories. Now, what are its accessories, right? I mean, obviously, you perceive emptiness or ultimate reality. You've got some wisdom. You've got full-on wisdom, right? And then you're using that wisdom to become a different kind of being until you're fully enlightened, right? So now, what are then the accessories? What are the accessories to wisdom, and what are the accessories to unstained existence?
Passion.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everything else on the path, you could almost say. It's like if you're in the debate ground and someone brings something up, you can just say, oh, well, that relates to the unstained side. Because pretty much everything that's taught that supports emptiness, right, and the paths 3, 4, and 5 is an accessory. All the other Buddhist books, all the other teachings, all the things which are leading to that, right, are accessories, and that they're complementary and helpful and conducive, right?
So the point is that we're supposed to stay on the unstained side, basically, rather than the stained.
Forever? No. I mean, on some level, I suppose there's a deep unconscious desire to stay on the stained side forever. Are you saying which side are we supposed
I
to
mean,
stay on?
the point of the whole stained versus unstained is. And
Why are they doing that?
yeah, why the list?
Yeah. Karma. Thank you for that, Lena.
Okay.
Because if they're saying, look at the world, all right? Well, I mean, this is not Abhidharma, but just in general. The world is, 4 noble truths, 4 Arya truths, right? Life is suffering, has a cause, has an end to suffering, and has a cause, right? You gotta know what the causes of suffering are. You gotta know what the causes of the end of suffering are. Stained and unstained, right? So, as an educated Buddhist, everything we do is about understanding what is unstable. What is a cause for happiness and what is a cause for purity, what is a cause for enlightenment, as opposed to, what is a cause for continued suffering and dissatisfaction and, limited existence and, problems and ups and downs and all around and good days and bad days, right? So this is where the, the Abhidharma starts to go into. Let's talk about that, right? So, there's one other point that is made, and in some respects, in Karma course, there were various add-ons which were thrown in, and one of the add-ons which was thrown into the course was this, the Abhidharma makes the point that here's what exists, here's how it gets destroyed, including you, right? And therefore, you have a finite amount of time. Okay, what are you going to do with it? All right, we're all going to die in normal lives for sure. All right, we have a finite amount of time. We don't know how much. All right, use the time well. Find the most powerful tools possible, the most effective tools possible, to get the highest results possible. Right, while we're alive, while we have time, and while we have opportunity. And so, in that context, it's, well, what is the best tool? What is the highest thing we can do? How do we know what to put our time and energy into, right? And so they talk about how do you know if you're wasting your time with your studies or with the books you're reading? I mean, they didn't have TV to deal with and internet and texting and, I mean, it wasn't a question of should I go for, should I hop on a flight for the weekend, and like whatever. They were just talking about, well, if you have a choice between this picture and that picture, and you could read this book, you could read that book. That's somewhat limited in that regard. So that's what, so the focus is how do you know if you're wasting your time, and how do you know if you're wasting your life in terms of what you're engaging in, right? Obviously, if you're engaged in idle talk and all the rest, you're wasting your life. Already covered elsewhere. But even from the perspective of, let's say you want to be a serious spiritual practitioner, let's say you want to be reading spiritual books, how do you know if you've got a good one? How do you know if you're on the right track? And so they say, look, if you're gonna study some material, and if it's going to be reputable Dharma, Buddhist book, spiritual material, then it needs to have 4 attributes or 4 qualities. Okay. If it doesn't have these 4 qualities, then why are you wasting your life and why are you wasting your time? You could read the New York Times, you could read People magazine. I don't know what they had back then. Probably not. I mean, what did they have? I mean, would they have had like trashy novels in the day of woodblocks? Probably. I don't know. Doesn't matter, does it?
Did they have theater and things like that back then?
Kabuki. Who knows? I don't know. That's Japan. This is. Anyway. So. But in our case, we've got infinite stimulation that they didn't have. I mean, they had a choice of, am I going to walk over to the library and get the woodblock print, or not, and we have media bombarding us continuously, right? Saying, take this in, take this in, take this in, take this in, consume this information, consume these products, on and on and on. And so, it's hyper exaggerated relative to what they're talking about. And so they're talking about books, but in our time you could apply it to everything we do, whether it's surfing the web or texting or, going to movies or any of it. And so I think it's relevant in our time to extrapolate beyond just books. They talked about books because that's what they had. I mean, I think we should be applying this to pretty much everything in our lives, not just books which no one reads anymore, Who reads a book? Like, why do we care, So let's take it beyond the realm of books, okay? He's talking about books, but let's just apply it broadly, all right? So the first thing to look at is the subject matter. What is the subject matter of the material, right? Is it dealing? And in the case of the Abhidharma, they're talking about all phenomena, and is it stained or unstained? Is it pure or is it impure? So any material you're going to look at, I'm not going to use the word book. Any material you're going to look at, what is the subject matter? Is it meaningful, right? Does it serve a higher purpose, right? And then secondly, well, the second, so these are the second. The second is, what is the purpose of the subject matter, right? So identify the subject matter. What is the purpose of the subject matter? Is the second attribute thing that you got to look at. I mean, the mind is like a sponge. Anything it's exposed to takes in. You know, I mean, you know, I watch TV at night, I get fried, and I watch TV at night sometimes, and then it's, you know, it's like it just pops, stuff pops into my head days later. You know, it's like, not like I want to be thinking about it, but it's just the nature of the mind. It's a sponge. It soaks up whatever it's exposed to, for better or for worse. You know, and I mean, you see with kids especially. You know, they see something and they're having like dreams about it weeks and months into the future. You know, because it's in there. You know, they're so impressionable. And they haven't been filled up in some respects yet. You know, by all the stimulation. So extremely important to be aware that anything you put in front of your mind is taken into your mind and retained by your mind. And those imprints are there, and they're going to be with you for who knows how long, you know, for a very long time, lifetimes. So extremely important to be cognizant of the fact that anything you're exposing your mind to affects your being, affects who you are, affects your thought process, affects your feelings, affects how your mind works, and it is part of the content of your mind, right? So if we say, I only want a pure mind, and I only want a virtuous mind, but then we go out and watch torture porn or something, not really going to happen, you know? I mean, simply because that's being put into the mind, right? So that's the second point is you know, the purpose of what is the purpose of the book, you know? The purpose of the Abhidharma is to plant wisdom which analyzes things in an ultimate way in people's minds. And the purpose of the Abhidharma is to provide the information to be able to analyze things in an ultimate way, right? To be able to gain wisdom, to understand things and analyze things in the highest way possible, in the most ultimate way possible. You know, it's not about, you know, are the Mets better than the Yankees, or, you know, is it going to snow tomorrow or not? It's like, you know, what is the most profound wisdom that we can apply to analyze, you know, the reality around us. So that's the subject matter of the Abhidharma. And then third, what is the ultimate goal of the book? What is the ultimate goal of the material? Why was this material produced? 99.9% of the times in our society is to depart you from your money. Okay? Not much other purpose, you know. So not a very high goal for most of what we're consuming, right? So the goal of the Abhidharma is to lead people to attain the two states of nirvana. In this school, the two states of nirvana refer to nirvana and ultimate full enlightenment, Bodhi, or Buddhahood. So they call it two nirvanas, right? Nirvana and full enlightenment. So that's the goal of the Abhidharma, is to lead people to those two nirvanas. Then the fourth attribute that one has to look at when one's thinking about what am I applying myself to, and what am I studying, and what am I exposing myself to, is the relationship between those three things. I mean, obviously there's linkage. You know, you got a subject matter, you got a purpose of the subject matter, and then you have a goal of the subject matter. So you're going to look at it all together as a big picture and say, okay, the purpose is achieved through the subject matter, and the goal is achieved through the purpose. So in the case of the Abhidharma, the subject matter is everything that exists, right? The Abhidharma is categorizing all existing objects, and you know, it's trying to lead one to the highest goal of enlightenment. So it's a hard standard to live by, to say, you know, what should I expose myself to? I only want to expose myself to things which are going to contribute to my enlightenment. I mean, hard to live that way, right? I mean, very hard, especially in this day and age when we're overstimulated by so many things. But it's, I think, a very profound and very important point. And I think the more we're able to do it, the faster spiritual progress we'll make. Simply because, and this is the point that they were making in the Abhidharma when they're going through this, is you only got so many hours in a day, you only got so many days in your life. what are you going to use it for? You got to decide. It's not just like, oh well, maybe a little here, maybe a little there. You got to go for it. You're going to be serious and you're going to go for it. You got to say, this is what's important. This is what I'm going to apply and dedicate my life to, and I'm going to spend every available hour focused on this stuff and not that stuff. And the more we do that, then the faster we progress and the more results we get. And I mean, it really is that basic in many respects. You know, it's just hours committed. How much of the time is the mind focused on and applying itself to this? It's like business, you know, it's like anything. The more you think about it, the more you apply yourself, you know, the more you engage in it, the more result you get. You know? And this is no different. And for some reason people think that with spiritual things it's okay to flit around and think about it now and then and spend 1% of their time on it, and you know, great results will occur. It just don't work, you know. Sorry, but it don't work. You know, spending 1% of your time to get spectacular results is not very realistic. You know, or spending 10% of your whatever, pick a number. You know, what percentage of your time do you need to apply yourself to get spectacular results in business, or in art, or in dance, or in theater, or in anything, or in running, or in sports? I mean, so it's, you know, it's a reality check. They're just saying, look, don't waste your life, okay? Your life is finite. Decide how you're going to use it. Wake up and smell the roses, you know? The results you get are equivalent to the energy and the time and the effort you put in. That's all. Like, so, so there are two most basic types of karma, which the opening line of the 4th chapter addresses, which is the movement of the mind, right, which is mental karma, right? The mind moves. What does it mean for the mind to move? 64 movements per mind. So according to Abhidharma, Buddhism, there are 64 fluctuations of the mind, or movements of the mind per instant. You know, they call it per finger snap because they didn't have the calibrated instruments at the time. So, you know, there are 64 fluctuations of the mind in an instant. Each of those fluctuations of the mind is a karma, represents karma collected. And it's really, I mean, it's a nice way to think about it is movie frames. You know, for a movie to appear to be real, right, there are 60 frames per second have to be projected. You know, like on the TV, on the refresh rate, if the refresh rate is slower than 60 per second, the eye perceives it as discrete frames. You can see the break in the frames. And so when a movie is projected, you know, sometimes it slows, I mean, in the old days, sometimes the reel would slow down and you could see the frames going by, right? And the reel would speed up and you know, it would be a continuous flowing picture, right? It's very interesting to me that, you know, that in ancient Buddhist times, they said it was 64 or 5 instants per second.
24. Movie rate is 24.
Nowadays?
No, it was when movies were
Oh, it
created,
was?
and now it's a little bit faster for
Okay.
video.
You got me. So let me say it more precisely. There is a certain rate at which it becomes a stream of vivid perception, right? And not discrete frames, discrete still frames. So when we talk about karma being collected in the movement of the mind, we are perceiving everything like a movie, right? We don't see the frames, we see the flow. We see the movie in a continuous stream of live action without breaks in between each frame, right? So one way to think about these karmic instants are, you know, perhaps the discrete frames, you know. We're collecting 64 karmas, you know, which become our perceptual reality, right? So we are perceiving reality as karmic ripenings, as the flow of karmic ripenings, which is our multi-sensory experience, right? We have, when you go to a movie and it's visual and it's auditory, right? And they try to bring in 3D or 4D, you know, pipe in some smells or shake the seats or whatever. It doesn't work very well, but for us, you know, we are having these karmic seeds which are ripening such that all of our senses are perceiving reality in a stream without interruption, not as individual frames. right? So, and I got off on a little tangent there, but interesting to think about, right? So, most basic type of karma is movement of the mind. 64 karmas per second, call it, per instant, are collected and obviously expressed, right? Karmas are being collected and karmas are ripening continuously. And so that's mental karma, right? We have karma of what? Body, speech, and mind, right? So that's the second basic division of karma. And in the Abhidharma Kosha, it's what follows. It's called the movement of the mind and what follows, right? Because what happens after you think a thought?
There's an action.
Typically you say or do something. I mean, not always. Sometimes you just think and that's the end of it, right? But typically, there's word and deed that follow the movement of the mind. So, is it possible to say something without thinking a thought first? Is it possible to do something without thinking a thought first? No. So that's why the movement of the mind is the raw karma, is the first base element of karma, the first part of karma, if you will. And then what follows is the second basic division of karma, right? What it motivates. So the movement of the mind motivates what follows, right? Okay. So, so the mind moves, right? A thought arises. It's a ripening of a past karma, right? And one feels something. One thinks something, one feels something, typically, right? And so I'd like to be less abstract, perhaps, than the text. This is just me personally. I have to make the distinction, right? Because from my personal experience, we don't live in a world of thought primarily. You know, we tend to respond to our feelings more than our thoughts, right? So, you know, there is a movement of the mind, there's a thought that arises, and then there's some kind of follow-on that occurs. I feel happy, I feel upset, I feel hurt, whatever it is, right? So, something good, bad, or neutral, right? I mean, those are basically the options, right? I mean, when anything arises in our mind, or in our heart, or our feelings, it's good, bad, or neutral, right? And so, I mean, these are the three basic types of karma, right? Neutral karma, good karma, and bad karma, or non-virtuous. You call it virtuous and non-virtuous karma, right? So, how do we define virtue and non-virtue? How do we define good and bad, right, karmically? So from a Buddhist perspective, there's not a value judgment associated with good and bad. In most systems, there's a value judgment associated with you're good, you're bad. You do something bad, ooh, right? And it's that element and that component is really not relevant in Buddhism and in Buddhist teachings. I mean, not in scriptural teachings anyway. A virtue or a goodness is something which brings you the experience of happiness or pleasure in the short term, right? And ultimately leads you to the end of suffering. Okay, so you have the short-term component and you have the long-term component. The long-term component is that it protects you from future suffering by moving you towards nirvana and enlightenment. Right? So a virtue would be something which is moving you towards your ultimate happiness in the long term, and something which is also bringing a pleasurable result, a happy result, a positive result, a positive emotional experience or thought in the short term. Right? So And it's very interesting because, you know, two people can think the same thought, and one can be happy about the thought, and one can be unhappy about the thought. I talk to my wife about this all the time. It's half glass full or half glass empty, right? It's like, honey, this happened. Aren't you happy about it? No, it sucked. You know, it was terrible. You know, what do you mean? You know, so you know this this whole thing about, and we're not going to do the emptiness thing. That's later, right? But just from the perspective of the karmic seed ripening, like there is a movement of the mind, okay, and what follows, okay. What follows the movement of the mind? Feeling happy, feeling sad, feeling good, feeling bad, right? Being up, being down, or indifferent, right? So, it is personal, you know? It's very personal as to whether a certain ripening is pleasant or unpleasant for a person, you know? You know, some people like to be whipped and they get off on it. Some people think it's horrible and it's some painful and unpleasant, you know? It's strictly a personal, internal thing, right?
Is that because you can't share karma?
It's because some people are into... Never mind. I suppose you can't share karma in that respect, Chris. It's true. But that's not really what it meant.
Buddhist dungeons.
What's that? Yeah, right. There's a different meaning of bead. Never mind. Oh man. So virtue, you know, karma. We talk about karma. There's virtue, good karma, bad karma. Virtuous karma, non-virtuous karma. There's not a value component to it here. It's not like somebody says, I think this is good and I think this is bad. I think this is right and I think this is wrong. Okay? From a Buddhist perspective, virtue and non-virtue is about what ultimately produces our own happiness or our own unhappiness, our own pleasure or our own pain, our own, you know, continued suffering or our end of suffering. Right? So when we talk about what is good karma and what is virtue, that's what it is. It's anything we do which will lead to a result which is good. On whatever level you want to talk about it, mental, emotional, physical, right? And leads to, you know, furthering our spiritual evolution towards enlightenment, right? So, the non-virtue, it was the opposite. It's anything that we think or say or do which will bring us a result which is unpleasant and undesirable and painful and suffering. And which we don't want, right? And then neutral karma is, you know, the thing that isn't either of those, you know, basically. It's an action which gives a result other than those two, you know, basically. So when the Abhidharma then is talking about karma, you know, it's talking about here's stained things and here's unstained things. Guess what the stained things do?
Make you unhappy.
Yeah. You know, guess what the unstained things do?
Make you happy.
Pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most of us have the two categories completely scrambled in our mind and in our understanding and in our lives, and it's the great misfortune of our existence that there is not a clear checklist of what makes you happy and what makes you unhappy that's readily confirmable, and you can just say, if I follow this checklist, I'll be happy. And if I follow this checklist, I won't be happy, right? Now, does such a checklist exist? Yeah. I mean, you know, this is the teachings on karma, right?
Who's the vows?
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly right, Dora. It's, you know, we have progressive levels of vows. You know, and it starts with the Praktimoksha vows, the basic 10 non-virtues, right? Where you say, I'm going to engage in 10 virtues and avoid the non-virtues, you know, those non-virtues. And they're fairly coarse and they're fairly crude, like, I won't kill anybody. I mean, that's a fairly crude thing, right? You know, I won't steal physical objects from people. That's fairly crude. And so that's the sort of first level of working with refining how we relate to things, right? To kind of stop engaging in the stained activities and to focus on pursuing the pure activities, the virtuous activities. And then as you move up through the vows, you go from working with the 10 virtues, avoiding the 10 non-virtues, then you go to the next level of vows, which typically would be bodhisattva vows, which are the exact same thing, which is like, look, pursue here's a list, go through pursue all these things, okay, and you're doing virtue. Avoid all these things, and you're avoiding negative karmas, right? So focus your life on doing this and avoiding that, so that you can become a pure being, right? Stained and unstained. And then, you go on to higher vows, whether it be ordination vows or Vajrayana vows, right? And it's a more refined system of saying, at a much more subtle level, think like this, and you'll be thinking powerful, virtuous thoughts. Don't think like that, because those are negative thoughts, and those are ignorant thoughts, and that's relating to the world in an ignorant way and living in an ignorant way, right? So that's exactly right. And so, at a basic level, we understand karma as the movement of the mind and what it motivates, right? And we understand karma as being virtuous and non-virtuous, stained and unstained, right? And we do have lists of, follow this checklist, don't do this stuff, clear checklists provided by omniscient beings who can, perceive highest reality, karmic ripenings and causation and all the rest. Our task and our job is to study those things and to live that way and to live in accordance with that, right? So, there so the text and in the presentation, they actually go into the 10 non-virtues and the karmic correlations associated with those things. And they say, look, the basic 10 non-virtues, okay, avoid these 10 things. If you don't avoid these 10 things, here's what's going to happen to you, just to be clear. And so they take each of the 10 non-virtues and they say, all right, there's a karmic result associated with engaging in each of these non-virtues, right? Very basic, first level, introductory level behavior modification, right? And so karmically, when one collects the karma, so one collects the karma. When the karma ripens and brings a result, it brings a result on several levels. Okay, so there is a personal result. So let's say I didn't avoid the 10 non-virtues, and I said to Hector, you're such a dumbass, and I hate your guts, and I hope I never see you again. So harsh words, right? So there's actually an environmental. So when that karma ripens for me, so I do. Let's say I did that last year, and that karmic seed has had time to ripen, to gestate and ripen. So that karmic seed ripens, and it brings a result on several levels. One of which is environmental. Our world is produced by our karma, right? I mean, we tend to think, oh, my karma produced, me, winning the lottery or getting hit on the head by a mugger or whatever. And you hear people say, oh, that must have been their karma that happened to them. Which in and of itself is a basic misunderstanding. That statement is a basic misunderstanding of karma. It expresses an ignorance about karma. Every single perceptual instant on every level is karma, is a karmic ripening. So when a person says, well, that must have been their karma, they're basically expressing that they think that one thing was and everything else wasn't. When in fact, every single perception on every level with every sense is karmic ripening. Okay? Both, through all 6 senses. So, lost my train of thought.
How is that a mistake to say that? I'm confused.
Well, it's not. It is accurate, but it tends to imply that they're thinking that the second before that, the second before that, the second before that was not their karma. Because if they really understood, they'd be saying, well, the fact that I'm speaking to them right now is their karma. You know, and the fact that they're here breathing is their karma. And the fact that they, you know, the fact that every single second of every single day happened the way it did was their karma. So there's nothing, I'm not saying there's anything wrong at all with the statement. It's just the implication behind the statement, you know. There's an inference to me that they're forgetting about everything else.
Okay.
You're talking about environmental costs.
Thank you. Okay, kind of. Okay. So, you know, we collect karma, and the karma ripens into our external world. So when karma ripens, it's not just that karma ripens into somebody, you know, hitting us over the head or winning the jackpot. Karma ripens into this room. You know, karma ripens into the New York City streets. Karma ripens into, you know, our partner and our relationships and everything, right? So when we think about karma and collecting karma, we don't typically think of it on that level. We think of somebody was good to me or somebody was bad to me. We don't think like these fans moving the way they do. Why is that one slow and that one fast and that one faster and that one not moving at all? You know, you know, we don't typically think about like, yeah, this, the lights and the fact that these are my eyes, but it's still too dark. All these things are karmic ripenings. You know, that corner is really dark because it's just not really relevant. It's background. You know, yeah.
I was just kind of curious, how does karma explain, or what's the Buddhist view on what's happening at Ferguson, or what happened to the kid at Ferguson?
Yeah. So, I mean, they can answer that in a lot of ways, right? On a lot of levels. So, I'll do it quickly. And it ties in with what we're going to talk about later, but I'll just zip through it. So, if someone was hurt or killed, that means that they engaged in a like activity in the past sometime, right? Past lives, this life, whatever. And we're going to go into karma in a lot more detail. But so the person who was hurt by the police, right, hurt someone in the past. Therefore, collected the cause that brought the result. Okay. The police officer who hurt the person, rightly or wrongly, whatever his motivation was, collected karma personally from that action, from that activity, and will experience that ripening in his future, right?
Is that what the protest is about outside the Ferguson thing?
Yeah.
I don't know what Ferguson.
Well, someone was hurt or injured or killed. Was it killed? Killed by the police, and unjustly, it seems. And so
Brooklyn?
no, it's another
Missouri.
Yeah.
In Missouri? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So.
Well, I would have to say that the grand jury found him not.
So yeah.
So
for whatever it's worth.
Right.
So.
The rule of law has determined that there were no charges to be filed.
Yeah. So, you know, it becomes quite, you can unwind it quite a lot. So every single individual living being has a different perception about that event, right? So that, we could spend a lot of time on it. But from a karmic perspective, you would say, why does every single living being have a different perspective about that event? Many of those things are shared. Many of those perceptions are very similar or common, right? And others are different, subtly or grossly, right? And so each being has collected a cause to have a certain, their particular perception, right, of that experience. So when a lot of people have collected similar causes, they would experience similar results, okay? So for example, we're in this room right now together collecting karma, all collecting very similar karma, but slightly different. Everyone has a different thought process, a different motivation, etc. So because we're in this room collecting a similar karma, we will all have a similar ripening, basically, in the future. Okay? And that's true of all beings. So, you know, we would all have a ripening of some great holy thing in the future, right? But slightly different. I don't know if that answers your question. I could go into it in a lot of detail, but does that address the question or not really? All right. Okay. So, so the text. So we talk about pursuing the 10 virtues, avoiding the 10 non-virtues, and karma ripens at different levels. The karma ripens to bring the environment. It ripens into our environment. It ripens into an environmental result, an environmental experience, right? So we collect a karmic seed. We collect a lot of karmic seeds. They produce our external environment, okay? And then secondly, it produces a personal result where we experience something similar to what we did. You know, I killed someone, it's going to affect my lifespan, right? And then there's what's called a ripened result. And basically that's the realm that you end up in. So when you collect karma. So the karma you collect will produce your very realm you're in, whether you're in a human realm or a hell realm or an angelic realm or whatever. It will produce the details of that environment, and it will produce your personal experience, your personal event, the personal events and feelings within that, right? Within that environment, all right? So kind of from macro down to micro, if you will, all right? So there are three basic types of experiences, or three different, how to say it, karma ripens in three different times. So when we collected karma, it's either going to ripen in this life, the next life, or some other future life after the next life, right? And so we're not going to get into it tonight, but there's a whole detailed study of how do you collect karmas which will ripen quickly. Because if we're collecting virtuous karmas, we want them to ripen quickly, right? And if we're collecting non-virtuous karmas, we want to delay their ripening as much as possible. You know, and short circuit their ripening and put off their ripening as much as possible. And so, you know, typically, the first 20 years or so of one's life, the karmas one has collected in their previous life or what are ripening, right? Typically, one is not seeing karmas ripen. I'm going to say this. Typically, the karma one is collecting in the early years of this life will not ripen until they're past 20 or so. So if when you're 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, you're collecting karmas, which you are, they're not going to ripen until 20 years later or so, typically. Okay. So if you had a good first 20 years, thank you from your past life. So after the age 20, you're pretty much starting to influence your own karmic ripenings. All right. And so there's this lag time between when a seed is planted, when a karma is collected, and how long it gestates until it ripens and when it brings the result. Okay. So the more powerful the karma is that we collect, the faster it ripens. Most of the karmas that are collected tend to be pretty lame and pretty wimpy, and we'll talk about that next week. And they don't ripen very quickly. So a lot of the karma we collect will ripen in the next life or some, who knows when, future lives, right? But our goal is to be directed in collecting powerful, virtuous karmas that we want to have ripen in this life, right? Okay. So what are the 10 non-virtues we want to avoid?
Stealing, killing.
Yeah. So three of body, right? What are the 3 of body?
Killing, stealing, sexual misconduct.
Yeah, killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, forced speech.
Lying.
Yeah.
Harsh
Harsh words. Idle talk. We get it? 4, and then 3 of mind.
Wrong view.
Wrong views, number
Malice.
10.
Ill will and
Ill
coveting.
will, malice, coveting. Yeah, ill will, malice are the same. And coveting.
Coveting.
Yeah. Okay. So those are the basic 10 crude negativities that one typically engages in. And this is, it's like David Letterman. This is the top 10 list. These are the 10 most common negativities that we engage in. And it's not just an abstraction. these are the most typical negative behaviors that people live. And so it's saying, if you want to start somewhere, start with these 10, because these are the top. This is your top 10 hit list. Okay. So when we look at those 10 things, right? If we're going to avoid engaging in those 10 things, typically there's one of two motivations that we have. I don't want to look bad to other people, or I have some feeling within myself that I shouldn't do it, right? I mean, if you're going to restrain yourself from some negative activity, it's because you don't want to look like a schmuck, or you don't want people to think badly of you, or you don't want to get caught and go to jail, or whatever it is. You don't want to get fired for stealing or whatever, right? So it's either reasons related to others or reasons relating to oneself. What is my own conscience telling me? What is my motivation? What is my inner compass saying? What kind of person do I want to be, right? So those are the two basic motivations as to why we're going to engage or not engage in our negativities, right? All right. And so this is called, to be more scriptural. It's the two motivations are shame and consideration, right? Like, I'm going to avoid non-virtues because I'm ashamed of what other people might think of me. I'm concerned about other people's impression of me. I'm concerned about other people's opinion of me, and I want other people to have a good opinion of me, and therefore I'm going to behave in front of them, at least, in a way that gives them a good opinion of me, right? Or having some kind of consideration within oneself, right? Okay. So shame is relating to yourself, and consideration is because you want other people's consideration, right? It's self-image. Shame is self-image. I don't want to be this kind of person, right? I don't want to be that kind of person, all right? Okay, so when we start, I think let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about those 10 non-virtues and how each of them correlates to karmas, what you get if you engage in each of those at all three levels, at the level of rebirth and environment and personal experience, okay? So take a break. I'm afraid there's only like a few measly vegetable chips out there to snack on from what I saw. But refresh yourself on vegetable chips and then come back, all right?